right, well, welcome to our knife safety demonstration. This is a great lesson for 7th graders who are just being introduced to knife usage this year, and a great review for 8th graders who may have been at home during quarantine last year and want to refresh your knife skills, or you're just looking for a quick review. All right, so you'll see I have a bunch of vegetables here, a bowl of water for our French fries, and I have several knives. The knife that I'll be working with the most is this chef's knife, okay? And a chef's knife is like an 8 to 10 inch long all-purpose knife. This has been recently sharpened, which means it's ready to go, okay? At home, you may have a smaller chef's knife or a knife like this, which is called a santoku. This is another all-purpose option that you could use at your home. Another essential knife is the paring knife. This is what we use when we're cutting small things, and not actually on the cutting board, but in our hand. And this is a more advanced skill, even though it's a smaller knife, so we don't usually use these in FCS class. And I also have here a serrated knife, which you would use to cut more delicate foods like tomatoes or citrus, and that you could also, of course, use to cut bread. The serrated knife has a sawtooth edge, which helps you saw through the food rather than a smooth blade on our chef's knife that glides through the food. All right, so let's talk about some basic knife skills. First thing, you want to have a cutting board that's really stable. This one has rubber grips on it that keep it from sliding around. If you have a cutting board that seems like it's moving on your counter a bit more, you could always put a damp towel underneath or a damp paper towel to kind of anchor it to your counter. And with my chef's knife, you notice whether I'm putting it here or to the side, the blade is always away from me. And that's because I don't want to cut myself as I'm moving my hands around, touching our vegetables and touching our cutting board, okay? With knife safety, the main thing that you need to keep in mind is staying aware and careful. You don't want to be distracted while you're using a knife. You don't want to be talking to other people or watching videos or seeing what other people are doing around your house or in our classroom. You really want to be focused in on what you're doing so that you can stay as safe as possible. When you're holding your knife, your dominant hand holds your knife. So for me, that's my right hand. And you want to get a good grip on the handle, okay? And don't put your finger up here. Putting your finger up here is really common. I see a lot of people do it, but you can actually see it like turns my finger a different color. That's because it's putting stress on my finger, and eventually it's really gonna start to hurt, and it doesn't help add to the stability of my grip. So I'm just getting a good grip on the knife. If you have a larger hand and you want to, say, choke up, get an even more stable grip on your knife, you'll often see chefs kind of pinch the top of the blade here, and then their remaining fingers grip the handle. This is another good option for you if you have a larger hand. But for me, I just like to get a good grip on the handle, and you can see my knuckle, my first knuckle is on top of the knife. It's not to the side, my thumb's not on top. My first knuckle's on top, my thumb's on the side, and my fingers are wrapping around. This gives me a really stable grip on my knife. Now, my non-dominant hand is going to be the hand that I use to hold the food, and I really don't want to cut it. So you're always going to make sure that that gripping hand is in a claw, which just means that your fingers and your thumb tips are tucked back so that you are not having them stick out and available to be cut, okay? So let's look at this in action on a potato. This is a pretty big potato. It's a russet potato, which is what we're using to make our French fries. And I'm gonna start by finding a flat spot, right? Potatoes are round, and cutting something that's round could be dangerous if it moves in the middle of your cut. So the first thing I'm gonna do is make a flat spot. I'm gonna get my hand in the claw. I'm gonna start my knife tip, okay? But then I'm going to push forward and down. And you can see where my knife ends up most of the cutting power is in the back of your knife, not the tip of your knife, okay? So keep that in mind while you're working. Now what I can do is put the flat part of my potato down, get my hand, my guiding hand in the claw, okay? And carefully slice down and forward to cut my potato into thick chips. Now, I'm feeling like, my knife is stuck. If your knife has suction, you are gonna have to carefully remove it from your food and move these aside, all right? Never use your knife to scrape things around. Put your knife down and use your hands, okay? So let's continue cutting this potato into slices, okay? Man, it's really sticking on me today. And my slices are about between 1/4 and 3/8 inch thick for our French fry recipe. All right, and this potato gave me 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 slices. So now what I'm gonna do is take these large pieces and slice them down into strips to make our French fries. It's okay to stack them up about 2 high, but I wouldn't go taller than that because the potato itself is a little bit wet, and if it slides around while you're cutting, then that could end up being pretty dangerous for you while you're using your knife. So 2 high is good. Get your claw. And remember, you start with the tip of the knife, but it's actually going forward and down to make your slice. So forward and down, forward and down, forward and down, okay? So you can see I'm making pretty consistent cuts, all right? When you're starting out using a knife, it may be really hard to make your cuts all the same size, but you do want to practice on getting the things you're cutting as close to the same size as possible. And this is because when you're cooking, things that are bigger take longer to cook, and things that are smaller cook faster. So the more consistent you can get your pieces, the more even cook and more even appearance you'll have in your dish. Now, if things stick to your knife, you can use your guiding hand to just push it off. Never grab your knife like this, okay? Because that's putting the blade in your palm, which is a pretty dangerous place to have a blade. So if something sticks, you can push it down from the dull side of your knife off of your knife so that you can move it to your next step. So this potato is almost done being cut, and I want to show you how we would turn these slices into dices. All right, so I'm gonna put about half of them back in the bowl, and then let's turn these couple slices into a dice. Okay, so here we have some nice rectangular pieces of French fry, and what I'm gonna do is just turn them the other way, get my claw, and now I'm going to dice, which means my knife's gonna be going like this sort of motion, moving down the French fry and turning these into cubes. You will definitely do some dicing for your fried rice recipe, and I'll demonstrate cutting these specific vegetables in the second part of this video. So here's my dice, and you can see now I have small cubes, which is a dice. The third kind of cut that we use in FCS is called a cross chop, and it's when we want to make things really small, like if we're mincing. So I'm gonna kind of separate this into this small pile, and I'm going to cross chop this. Now, your knife should never be loud, okay? I know sometimes people feel like if their knife's making a lot of sound, then they're official chef. No, you're showing that you actually don't know what you're doing. Chef's knives should be quiet because they're gliding up and down on the cutting board and through your food, okay? So with the cross chop, we're going to let our hand rest on top of the knife to stabilize it, not grabbing it because that could be dangerous for your fingers. But this part of my hand where my knuckles are going to rest on top of the knife, and my thumb is right in line. It's not grabbing the knife because we don't want to be cut. And then I'm just going to rock back and forth across the potato. Okay, so that's why this is called a cross chop. And this is not a very precise cut, right? Where these are all different sizes, but we're going to keep working through the potato until it's nice and small. Imagine this was some garlic. You would want those pieces pretty small in your recipe. Now, with cross chopping, it does tend to stick to your knife. So use your finger to push the food off of your knife, back onto the cutting board, and then put your knife down and put this back into a pile. I don't want you to get in the habit of using your knife to squish things or move things around, okay? So once this is back in a pile, then you can keep chopping it until it's small enough for the recipe that you are making, okay? And for this, we're just demonstrating different cuts with the potato. Okay, so there is our cross chop, our finely diced potato. We also have, a large dice, and we have our slices here. All right, in the second part of the video, I'll be showing you how to cut some other vegetables and prepare them for our fried rice recipe. Thanks for watching. Let's talk about moving around the room with your knife. A lot of times you're just gonna take the knife out of your drawer and use it right there on the counter. But then you're going to have to move to a different part of your kitchen when it comes time to wash. Or in FCS class, you may have to carry a knife from our front demonstration area back to your kitchen. We want to make sure that you're doing that safely. The main thing is you never walk around with a knife in a threatening way, right? This is really dangerous. And if you fell, your knife's going forward and it could really injure someone else. You also don't want to injure yourself, so you don't hold it up, you don't hold it in your hand with the blade. No, you just keep it by your side. So when you're walking with a knife, you carefully take your knife off the counter and then you place it by your side so that the tip is down and the blade is towards the back of you. This way you can safely walk around without endangering yourself or others. In the case of a falling knife, in this position, it's going to hit the floor and you need to step back and let it fall. When you have a knife on your counter and you're working, if you accidentally drop a knife, never try to catch it, okay? There's no handle on a falling knife. So if a knife is falling, you need to step back and let it fall, then pick it up. It's a much better option than trying to catch a sharp blade with your hand or with your foot. So when you're transporting knives, make sure you're holding them at your side with the blade down and behind you. And if you accidentally drop a knife, never try to catch it. All right, before we move on to chopping these other vegetables, I want to make sure I talk to you about cleaning up your knife. Knife safety is extremely important, and you have to practice it while you're using the knife, but also while you're cleaning and putting away the knife. So your cutting board's pretty easy, right? We'll just take this cutting board and put it in the sink. Some cutting boards can go in your dishwasher. You would want to check with your parents to see if your cutting board can go in the dishwasher. But your knife's a little different. We usually don't put knives in the dishwasher because they get banged around by the water and it can damage the blade. And we want to keep our knives sharp and in good condition because sharp knives are safe knives. If a knife is dull, you end up putting more pressure and you're actually more likely to cut yourself with a dull knife. So we want to take really good care of our knives and keep them nice and sharp and not put them in the dishwasher. So here's how we wash them. I have a sponge and I'm just going to be demonstrating it here at the table. You would be doing this back at your sink. You never put your knife in the sink, okay? When you're done with your knife, you can put it next to your sink until you're ready to use it, or you can leave it on your counter, okay? When you are cleaning your knife, you'll have a sponge, and hopefully you would never put a knife in your hand like this, right? This is really dangerous because you're putting the blade towards your palm. That's not how we clean our knife. What we do is we get our soapy sponge and a firm grip on our handle, and we fold the sponge over the dull side of the knife, okay? When you do that, you can drag it along the knife in one direction to clean it. If you want to make sure you got the other side, kind of turn it so you can see that and clean it that way. You don't want to go back and forth because you could cut yourself. When it comes to washing the handle, you will probably have to carefully switch hands so that you're holding the back of your knife here, and then you can wash the handle, rinse the whole knife off, and when you dry it, use your towel again over the dull side of the knife in one direction to dry the knife, dry the handle, and then carefully put that away in your knife block or your knife drawer.